What would you do if one day, while simply walking home, you got stopped by the police for no reason, just because of the color of your skin? What if they didn't just suspect you, but humiliated your family right there, in front of everyone? Would you stay silent and endure it? Or would you rise up in a way no one saw coming? Stay until the end, because the truth is about to be revealed, and it's going to change everything. Don't forget to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you won't miss the stories that will move your heart. Adrian Wolf, a 16-year-old boy in a faded gray hoodie with a worn backpack slung over one shoulder, was making his way home through the quiet streets of Summit Grove, where the sunset painted the glass windows in deep shades of orange and red. But before he could reach the intersection at Crown Ridge Trail, a sudden blast of a police siren shattered the calm. Officer Bradley Grayson, with eyes cold as steel, ordered Adrian to stop without offering a single explanation. Under the sharp stares of unfamiliar neighbors, Grayson let out a cruel remark about Adrian's forgotten father, drawing snickers from the gathering crowd. Across the street, Celeste Monroe, a small girl clutching a trembling phone in her hands, quietly recorded everything. Her eyes blazed with determination, as if she understood that this moment alone could either bury Adrian's future or save it. Hundreds of miles away, in a cabin tucked deep within the hills of Cedar Brook Ridge, Elias Griffin, Adrian's father, a legendary Special Forces veteran, received an urgent message from his wife, Natalia. He looked up from where he sat, the frost in his gaze beginning to melt, as a silent vow stirred inside him. Some people will always see his skin before they see his soul. Grayson tightened his grip around the cold steel of the handcuffs. In that split second, Adrian lifted his head, not with fear, but with a pride that could not be broken. And far away, with tears brimming in her eyes, Celeste tightened her grip on the phone, her finger hovering for a heartbeat before she pressed send, knowing that one simple tap could change everything or cost her everything. Grayson barked questions at him, his voice sharp and cutting, even though Adrian had done nothing more than quietly walk home from a long day at West Haven Academy. No suspicious papers, no real cause, just a vague feeling Grayson clung to, born from the kind of gaze that judged before it saw. In front of a few passing strangers, he threw out another sneer about Adrian's father, spitting out the words, "Kids like you never turn out any better than their fathers," as cold laughter split the bitter afternoon air. Hiding behind a battered billboard, Celeste Monroe's hands trembled with anger as she filmed every second. Her phone shook slightly, but her eyes were steady, burning like molten steel. She knew deep down, if she didn't speak up for Adrian today, there would be hundreds more Adrians tomorrow who would never have the chance to be heard. Far away in the quiet of Cedar Brook Ridge, inside a weathered log cabin, Elias Griffin shot to his feet as he read a short, chilling message from Natalia. "They touched our son." A sigh, heavy as a mountain, escaped his chest. A man who had survived battlefields across the world now felt the deepest kind of helplessness. Not against enemies in uniform, but against a system that would crush a boy like Adrian without a second thought, simply because of the color of his skin. And in that heavy silence, the warning his own father had once whispered came roaring back in his mind. Some people will see your skin before they ever see your soul. Back at the sun-drenched intersection, Adrian tightened the strap of his worn backpack, his gaze fierce, unbroken. He knew this wasn't the end. The real fight was only just beginning. Amid the biting chill of the Summit Grove intersection, Adrian tightened the strap of his backpack, his eyes lighting up with pride as he spoke of his father, Elias Griffin, a former Special Forces veteran who had taught him to keep his head high no matter the storm. But with a single cruel smirk, Grayson shattered that fragile moment. "Oh, so you dream of being a failure, just like your old man, huh?" he jeered, his laughter slicing through the air, louder than the passing traffic and the curious murmurs of the small crowd gathering around. That blow wasn't just meant for Adrian. It was a blade twisting deep into the dignity he had fought to build every single day. Across the street, a young girl clutched a trembling phone, silently recording it all. Celeste Monroe knew this moment wasn't just about an unjust stop. It was about dignity being dragged into the dirt, about an injustice so deeply woven into the bricks of this town it had become invisible to most. Far away in Cedar Brook Ridge, Elias Griffin tightened the tactical gloves around his fists as he read the message from his wife. A wave of helplessness washed over him, like a soldier sent into battle with his hands tied. He couldn't be there in that instant to shield his son, couldn't reach out the way every instinct in his body screamed to do. And in that moment, the words his father had once spoken echoed inside him. There will come a day when people see the color of your skin before they ever see the person you are. Today, that prophecy was unfolding, carved into Adrian's small but unyielding shoulders. Swallowing back his tears, Adrian stood his ground against Grayson's sneering gaze. And for the first time in his life, he understood something deeper than any lesson. Sometimes, standing tall is victory enough. Beneath the dim amber glow of Summit Grove's streetlights, as Grayson's mocking laughter still echoed like a blade slicing through Adrian's pride. Across the sidewalk, Celeste Monroe tightened her grip on her phone. The face of the 15-year-old girl didn't just show anger. It carried a silent pain, the kind only those who had witnessed injustice firsthand could understand. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady as steel as she began recording every second of the abuse unfolding before her eyes. But Celeste knew one lone video wouldn't be enough. She had already lost her brother to something just like this, a story no one ever bothered to tell. And this time, she swore she wouldn't let another name fade into silence. Not content with just recording, Celeste quietly fired off a text to her close-knit community group. It starts with us. Don't let them forget Adrian. A few blocks away, she ducked behind a battered old bus stop, using an oversized jacket to hide the phone now live streaming to a local community platform. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear of getting caught, but from knowing she had just lit a spark no one in this town would be able to smother. In that moment, Celeste Monroe, small, defiant, and unbreakable, became the first spark in a fire far bigger than herself. Over 600 miles away from Summit Grove, inside the sterile, antiseptic-bright corridors of Willowfield General Hospital, Isabel Hartman was just finishing her third consecutive shift. As she peeled off her medical apron, a shrill emergency ringtone buzzed from her pocket. A frantic, unfamiliar voice crackled through. "Ms. Hartman, we need to inform you. Your son, Adrian." Isabel's vision darkened. Her hand froze midair as the words harassment and police hit her like a blow. She didn't wait to hear the rest. Grabbing her keys, she bolted toward the parking lot, leaving everything behind. Under the harsh, cold gleam of neon lights, Isabel forced herself not to cry. She knew if she broke down now, Adrian would have no one left standing for him. One hand gripped the steering wheel, the other clutched a necklace etched with her son's name, the only keepsake she had kept from when Adrian was still little. She could still hear the voice of Elias Griffin, Adrian's absent father, whispering to her before he left for his final mission. Some people will see the boy before they ever see who he is. When that day comes, don't let him fight alone. With trembling breaths, Isabel whispered those words back to herself, a silent vow sealing inside her chest. The car tore through the night, carrying a mother, a broken heart, and a warning that was no longer just a fear, but a reality unfolding before her eyes. Isabel's car screeched into the parking lot of Riverton Precinct, tires shrieking against the pavement. She practically threw herself out of the car, heart pounding, clutching a folder of hospital records like it was the last scrap of control she had left in a world falling apart. Without waiting for anyone to guide her, Isabel stormed through the front doors and came face to face with Bradley Grayson. The officer still dressed in his crisp uniform, looking for all the world as if he hadn't just shattered a boy's life with the weight of his bias. "My son was walking home," Isabel said, her voice sharp as steel, though pain flickered unmistakably behind her eyes. "How do you explain that?" Grayson smirked, the kind of smirk that had crushed countless hopes before. He planted his hands on his hips, looking down at her like she was nothing more than a nuisance. Maybe the kid looked suspicious. In that moment, Isabel understood. No apology was coming. No justice would arrive on its own. But she also understood something deeper. She didn't need Grayson's permission to fight. A senior officer appeared at the far end of the hallway. Isabel didn't flinch. Among the sidelong glances beneath a system that could crush her with a single stamp of a file, she stood taller, her voice cutting louder across the sterile air. You don't get to decide who deserves to walk free. Somewhere out there, Adrian was waiting for one adult brave enough to stand up for him. Isabel signed the first complaint, but in her heart she knew the real battle had only just begun. Grayson was suspended the very same day, but instead of remorse, he sat alone in his battered patrol car, eyes dull, staring at his phone screen where Celeste's video had now spread like wildfire across online forums. Adrian's face, calm, unyielding in the face of authority, haunted him. Grayson's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel, his chest simmering with a nameless fury. Not because his actions had been exposed, but because a black kid, and worse, the son of Elias Griffin, had dared to challenge the system he had once believed was untouchable. Seething, Grayson dug through old files, tracing every thread he could find tied to the Griffin family. In the suffocating dark of his car, he muttered under his breath, "We'll see how long that kid holds out." Meanwhile, across town, inside the small, worn kitchen of their home, Isabel Hartman held Adrian close under the soft wash of warm yellow light. Adrian looked up and caught his mother biting down hard on her lip, as if trying to swallow every fear, every worry, just to give him a pocket of peace in a world that refused to offer any. Neither of them spoke, but they both knew the storm wasn't over, and the next one could hit even harder. But in that fragile, unspoken moment, Adrian realized something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the choice to stand tall, even when your heart was trembling. That day, Adrian leaned against the back wall of West Haven Academy, his worn-out backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. In the middle of the quiet storm rising all around him, he never expected to find an ally. Celeste Monroe approached, clutching the phone that still held the recording of yesterday's humiliation. No need for a lot of words, just a single nod of shared understanding. "My dad," Celeste began, her voice low but steady. "He's a civil rights lawyer. He knows how to make the ones who think they're untouchable answer for it." Adrian froze. In that moment he felt it, something sharp and undeniable. This time, he wasn't fighting alone. Under the blazing red sunset of Summit Grove, Celeste handed him a copy of the video in a small memory card. "Keep it," she said. "If they come for me, you take it to him." Her eyes burned with a determination that wasn't just for herself, but for something far bigger: justice. Adrian stared down at the tiny card in his hand, feeling the heavy weight of it. Something so fragile could change the fate not just of him, but of everyone like him. And right then, beneath the first warm winds of summer night, Adrian made a silent vow. No matter what happened, he would never let this be buried in silence. Night fell over Private Hollow Estate, where rows of blackened trees carved jagged shadows against the deep violet sky. Maxwell Hart slipped over the low stone wall, his eyes scanning the darkness with the sharpness of a seasoned predator. He had been suspended, his reputation stained beyond repair. But in Maxwell's mind, the hunt was far from over. Near the edge of the Griffin property, an old storage shed flickered with a single weak light, as if daring someone to step closer. Maxwell pulled out a skeleton key, picking the lock without leaving a trace. Inside, he combed through dusty bookshelves and battered file boxes, rifling through every page with a cold, feverish urgency. He wasn't looking for redemption. He was hunting for something that could destroy them forever. But what he found wasn't a folder of crimes. It was a small, tattered photograph. Adrian, just 5 years old, standing proudly in a miniature military uniform beside his father, Elias Griffin. Scrawled across the bottom in messy handwriting were the words, "Whoever touches him will answer to me." Maxwell froze, his hand trembling for the briefest moment. An eerie chill slid down his spine, as if the walls themselves were whispering a warning. Outside, the wind howled harder. A lone owl screeched from a high branch, and somewhere in the thickening shadows, a figure stepped forward, silent, swift, faster than fear could even call out its name. The military plane touched down in the pounding rain at Crestwood Field International Airport. Through the screaming winds, a single figure stepped off first, shoulders squared beneath a simple backpack, eyes sharp as a blade honed in the dark. Elias Griffin didn't wait for an escort. He cut across the restricted area on his own, clutching the phone that had buzzed nonstop throughout the grueling 14-hour journey. The last message from Isabel still glowed on the screen. Adrian needs you. Now. Outside, a black SUV idled, engine humming low. At the wheel was Kyle Renner, an old brother-in-arms from the Special Forces, waiting for him. No words were needed. Kyle simply nodded. Elias threw himself into the seat, rain soaking the back of his shirt. "You know you're stepping onto a battlefield, right?" Kyle asked quietly through the rearview mirror. Elias answered with a faint, cold smile, a smile carved from pure steel. "For Adrian, no war is too great." The SUV tore through the pitch-black streets of Riverton City like a silent arrow streaking toward the heart of an unseen enemy. Inside Elias's chest, every mile they closed was a wave building tighter and higher, of pain, of rage, but above all, of an unbreakable vow. Whatever it took, he would bring his son home. When Maxwell Hart was finally caught at Crown Ridge Trail, he barely had time to process what was happening. In the empty lot outside Riverton Precinct, Elias Griffin stepped out of the black SUV. His old Special Forces uniform faded into little more than battle scars, but the fire in his eyes, cold and unyielding, had never dimmed. No shouting, no grandstanding. Elias simply stood there, arms crossed, his gaze slicing through Maxwell as if stripping away every layer of cowardice he had ever tried to hide. And one by one, the other officers parted, clearing a path without a word. "Maxwell Hart," Elias said, voice low and steady, each word striking the air like a hammer. "You have disgraced everything that uniform was ever meant to stand for." Grayson, now exposed and stripped of power, muttered a feeble protest under his breath, but no one was listening anymore. The official suspension order was handed over. A short, grim nod from the chief inspector served as the final, silent verdict. Maxwell was handcuffed there on the asphalt, not for grand conspiracies or noble sins, but for something far smaller, far uglier: pettiness, greed, and a blind hatred that had rotted away whatever soul he might have once had. Elias didn't move, didn't smile. Only a fleeting sadness crossed his eyes. The sadness of a man who understood. Sometimes the real enemy isn't a person at all, but the rot that festers inside the very things meant to be good. Overhead, the sky above Riverton hung heavy and gray, as if mourning a battle where no one truly won. The moment Maxwell Hart was officially suspended, Celeste Monroe wasted no time. With her eyes shining with quiet determination, she carefully edited the footage of Adrian's encounter, preserving every face, every glance, every word of contempt exactly as it happened. No need for embellishments. The truth was powerful enough on its own. In the stillness of Summit Grove's night, Celeste hit post on social media, attaching a simple caption: "Some people will see us before they see our humanity. No more silence. Dashagas end racism." Within hours, the video spread like wildfire across a parched land. Phones buzzed in classrooms, in coffee shops, on street corners, places where cold indifference had once been the default. At West Haven Academy, where Adrian had once walked those halls, a younger boy, Malik, stood up, shyly raising a handmade sign: "If Adrian can stand tall, so can I." When Adrian heard the news, he stayed silent for a long time. In his eyes burned both pride and fear, because he understood now. It's not the first stand that's the hardest. It's staying upright when every eye is watching. Later, Celeste sent him a short message. "They need to see you not fall. You're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for all of us." And in that moment, Adrian Wolfe was no longer just a lone teenager. He had become the first spark of the EndRacism movement in Summit Grove. A small flame, perhaps, but one strong enough to ignite hearts that had long grown used to the dark. But while the crowd was still ablaze over Celeste's video, darkness once again fell over Crown Ridge Trail. After days of carrying the heavy weight of public scrutiny, Adrian Wolfe just wanted to find a quiet corner to breathe. He walked beneath the brittle branches, unaware of the shadow tracking him from behind. Maxwell Hart, suspended, disgraced, but never truly gone. This time, it wasn't just threats whispered into the wind. He lunged out from the brush, grabbing Adrian with brutal force. Amid the crackle of dry leaves and the tightening thud of his own heartbeat, Adrian didn't scream. He clenched his jaw, steadying himself with the words his father had once whispered. Calm is your sharpest weapon when you have nothing else left. Hart dragged him toward a dilapidated shed at the edge of the park, desperate to silence Adrian before the truth could spread any further. Thrown onto the rotting wooden floor, Adrian didn't panic. Instead, he locked eyes with his attacker, his gaze burning with the kind of defiance born from understanding one brutal truth. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to break. Somewhere else, Celeste Monroe noticed Adrian's sudden, eerie absence. And hundreds of miles away, Elias Griffin, having just stepped off a classified mission, received a single, chilling message. Adrian is missing. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He dropped his bag and tore through the airport at a dead sprint. Everything he had ever fought for, everything he had ever bled for, was now under threat, right here, on the soil he called home. The night had only just begun in Summit Grove, and this time, nothing and no one would stop Elias Griffin from bringing his son back. In a cold, forgotten corner of Shadow Pine Industrial Park, Adrian Wolfe lay curled up on the freezing cement floor, his wrists raw and numb from the tightly wound cords. Outside, the night swallowed every sound, except for the faint, deliberate footsteps drawing closer. Elias Griffin didn't need a flashlight. He followed the faintest trail, a dropped hat, a scrape along a wall, the faint scent of antiseptic clinging to the stale air. Keep your breath safe, Adrian, he whispered silently to himself, heart pounding, yet his footsteps cold and steady as a ghost. Inside the abandoned warehouse, Maxwell Hart rifled frantically through Adrian's backpack, desperate to find whatever he believed could destroy the Griffin family. He never heard the silent storm closing in behind him. With one swift, practiced move, Elias grabbed him out of the dark, locking him into a hold that brooked no argument, no shouting, no warnings, just silence, cold, heavy, and final, like a verdict long written. Adrian looked up, his eyes red with exhaustion and pain. As his father's calloused hands worked the knots free, Adrian didn't cry. He simply nodded, silent but fierce, a promise spoken without words. I did what you taught me. I stood my ground. Elias pulled his son into his arms, and for the first time in years, the embrace wasn't just protection, it was a vow. No matter how many times this world tried to break them, they would not fall. And in that broken, battered warehouse where darkness had once ruled, hope found a new flame, and it burned stronger than ever. As Elias Griffin escorted Maxwell Hart out of the abandoned warehouse, the dim glow from the street lamps at the edge of the industrial park swept across Adrian Wolfe's face. Not the face of a boy broken, but of a young warrior standing tall, his eyes disturbingly calm. All the way back, even as his hands still trembled from the blood trapped at his wrists, even as fear clung to his chest like a second skin, Adrian refused to cry. No ragged breaths, no whispered complaints, just steady, resolute footsteps, as if each one was a vow stitched into the very ground beneath him. From the rearview mirror, Elias stole a glance at his son, the weight in his gaze growing heavier. He recognized that silent pain, because once upon a time, he had carried it too, in his earliest battles against a world that didn't want him to stand. Elias reached out, resting a hand lightly on Adrian's shoulder, not saying a word, letting the simple, steady touch say everything he needed to. You've done more than I ever dared hope for. When they reached the front door of their home, Adrian paused, catching his reflection in the glass, scraped, battered, exhausted, but alive with a new kind of strength. Not the strength of rage, but the kind forged through dignity, through lessons learned the hard way, lessons that finally fully took root tonight. Sometimes victory isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who stands unshaken through the storm. And Adrian had stood firm, not just for himself, but for all those who would someday walk the path behind him. The air inside the Evercrest Police Command Center grew thick as Elias Griffin stepped through the doors. Maxwell Hart handcuffed and hunched beside him. The sharp, unblinking eyes of the FBI agents in the room immediately turned toward them, cold, focused, without a trace of hesitation. Adrian stood just behind his father, silent as a shadow, yet his gaze never once left Maxwell. He didn't look at him like an enemy. He looked at him like someone who finally understood what Maxwell represented: arrogance, prejudice, abuse of power, wasn't something you crushed with fists. It had to be dismantled by truth, by justice. Agent Carter, the lead on the internal investigation, stepped forward, holding a thick, heavy file in one hand. "We've been waiting for him," he said to Elias, his voice firm, carrying a rare note of respect. "And what's coming next? There'll be no room left for excuses." Maxwell, pale and desperate, opened his mouth to speak, but Elias silenced him with just a small shake of his head. Firm, final. No more words needed. In that moment, the entire world seemed to tilt toward the side of truth. No shouting, no violence. Just a father standing tall in the storm, and a son who had learned how to hold on to dignity even when the world tried to strip it away. As Maxwell was led out of the room, Adrian turned to Elias. His eyes didn't ask, "Did we win?" They asked something far greater. "Can we start changing everything now?" And in the quiet, weighted warmth of Elias's answering gaze, the answer had been waiting all along. Yes, starting now. Weeks after the confrontation that shook Summit Grove, the name Adrian Griffin slowly rose, not as a symbol of victory over a single battle, but as a living reminder of how to stand tall through storms without losing yourself. At a quiet community gathering in Liberty Square, hundreds of young people came together. No banners, no chants. Just a proud, heavy silence as Adrian stepped onto a small wooden platform beneath an old tree. In the golden wash of the late afternoon light, the young faces turned up toward him, not with awe, but with a deep, quiet respect rarely seen. Adrian didn't give a long speech. He spoke simply, in his own voice, warm, trembling slightly but steady. "We can't control how they see us, but we can always control how we respond." At the back of the crowd, Elias Griffin and Isabel Hartman stood quietly, their pride mingling with the bitter-sweet weight of everything it had taken to reach this moment. They knew every pain, every bitter silence, every helpless moment had forged the strength standing before them now. And as Adrian stepped down from the platform, one by one, the children and teens moved toward him. Not to ask for autographs, not to snap pictures, but simply to reach out, to touch him, as if reaching for proof that even in a world that could be so cruel, dignity could still survive. In Summit Grove, a quiet but unstoppable wave had begun to rise, starting with a boy once overlooked and growing into a generation that would no longer bow their heads. Amid the thunderous applause at the Summit Grove Community Awards ceremony, the name Celeste Monroe rang out through the cheering crowd. No one could have predicted it, that the quiet girl who had once silently filmed those first few shaky moments would now step onto the stage, her eyes glowing with light, her heart pounding with pure, unfiltered joy. The articles Celeste had written about the incident, raw, courageous, and unflinching, had rippled far beyond their small town, finding their way into major newsrooms across the country. Today, she was being awarded the Young Voice Award for Journalism, a recognition that opened a brand new road ahead of her. As Celeste held the certificate in her hands, she turned instinctively, scanning the crowd until she found Adrian's gaze. They shared a simple nod, small but heavy with meaning. "I didn't stay silent." Far off near a lamppost, her mother, Evelyn Monroe, leaned against the pole, tears glinting in the late afternoon sun. She had once feared that her daughter's voice would bring only trouble. Now she understood. Silence had always been the greater danger. At that same moment, the latest editions of the local newspapers rolled off the presses with a new headline: "One town, one video, and a generation that refused to bow." And in that moment, there was no doubt left. This victory wasn't just for Adrian. It was for every soul who had ever believed that even a small camera, wielded by steady hands, could set a much greater justice ablaze. Not long after the noise had faded, the Griffin family made a decision that moved all of Summit Grove. They would not leave. They would stay, to build something stronger than outrage, something that would last. On the grounds where an abandoned warehouse once stood, they established the Castlewood Youth Initiative Center, a place dedicated to teaching life skills, dignity, and peaceful resistance to young people of color in their community. On opening day, Adrian stood in the small courtyard, paved with rough bricks, flanked by Elias and Isabel, his family, hands tightly clasped together in a silence louder than any speech. The ceremonial ribbon fell. The crowd erupted. But what truly brought tears to many wasn't the shiny new sign hanging overhead. It was the small photograph mounted just inside the entrance. A young black boy standing tall in the rain, not with anger in his eyes, but with unwavering strength. Adrian knew that from this day forward, kids like him wouldn't have to wonder if they were good enough to be treated with fairness. They would be taught not just how to defend themselves, but how to walk tall, even when the world tried to look down. From a corner of the courtyard, Celeste raised her camera, capturing the moment. No one needed to say it aloud, but everyone understood. They had planted seeds, and the harvest would not be just for them. From Summit Grove, Adrian Wolf's story quickly broke past the borders of a small town. It became a quiet flame, lighting up the dark corners still left untouched, places where prejudice had once carved deep wounds into the dignity of generations. The image of Adrian standing tall and calm on a cracked basketball court spread everywhere, becoming a new symbol of inner strength. No banners raised, no loud slogans shouted, just the simple, stubborn act of standing firm, with dignity, with endurance, that made an entire community begin to see differently. The EndRacism movement didn't grow out of arguments. It grew out of silent, steady acts like his. In classrooms, on playgrounds, along crowded streets, new conversations began to rise. How do we not just resist, but inspire simply by how we exist? And if you're watching this video, if you've ever felt like you had to prove your worth because of how you look, where you come from, or who you are, remember, you are not alone. The greatest changes always start with someone willing to stand firm, even when the whole world feels like it's tilting. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand your ground? And if this story touched you, don't forget to hit subscribe, so together we can keep lighting more fires of hope, just like Adrian Wolf did. There are moments in life that don't need loud shouts or dramatic gestures. Sometimes all it takes is a young black boy, like Adrian Wolf, standing quietly, firmly in a world full of doubt to change everything. Adrian didn't choose anger. He didn't bow his head in defeat. When faced with mockery about his father, with questions about his worth, Adrian simply held on to his calm. The quiet lesson Elias Griffin had been teaching him since he was small, and it was that calm that spread outward. Celeste Monroe saw it, the community of Summit Grove saw it, and soon an entire movement rose, not from slogans or noise, but from the steady perseverance of a boy who once stood on the edge of being forgotten. What's the greatest lesson this story leaves behind? The true strength isn't about shouting louder, or hitting harder, or shining brighter. True strength lies in holding on to yourself when the storm hits. It's knowing you don't have to prove your worth to those unwilling to see it. You just have to stand firm, stay steady, and let your dignity speak for itself. Because sometimes the way we choose to exist, quietly, stubbornly, unshaken, is the loudest declaration the world will ever hear.